Say it with me. All isekai are trash. All of them. Every single one. All isekai are trash for the same reason that all cops are bastards. The individual merits of any isekai are irrelevant because they still choose to operate within the same system. An isekai could be the greatest piece of narrative fiction since Moby Dick, but it would still be trash because it relied on the worst narrative convention since Deus Ex Machina, which anime also abuses the hell out of, but that's another video. See, my liberal arts degree and a handful of listicles I wrote for Cracked back in college have led me to believe I'm something of a writer. And as a writer, I can tell you that isekai is not just an overused trope, it's a crutch for lazy hacks who took the hero's journey literally. If you just need an excuse to show off your overpowered self-insert or play with some made-up RPG mechanics, isekai takes care of all the boring stuff that actually makes it into a story. What's the central conflict? You're in a new world. Learn to live in it until you can figure out how to get back. Last part optional. How do you introduce exposition? Again, new world. Pro-Tycoon knows just as little about it as the audience. Why bother weaving details into the narrative when you could just make characters info dump on the guy who just got there? The easiest way to tell if an isekai is the written equivalent of the author's goon session rather than an actual story is to look at the areas the trappings of the genre can't help with. Is the world our protagonist ends up in a unique setting with its own history and personality? Or is it another Walmart brand Dragon Quest setting that could be swapped with McDonald's Play Place for all the difference it makes? Does it have an interesting and cohesive magic system that justifies the protagonist's gradual rise in power? Or is it all cheat skills and ass pulls that do whatever the plot needs it to? Is MC-kun a fleshed-out individual with their own personality, motivations, and character arc? Or are they an overpowered piece of wood that's loved by everyone and never faces any real adversity? Better yet, just ask yourself this one question. Did this need to be an isekai? Naruto didn't have to get hit by a bus in Akihabara and get reincarnated with a cheat skill for us to take interest in his story, although the cheat skill part is debatable. Same thing applies to most isekai. Pro-Tycoon being from another world doesn't typically add anything to the actual story being told. At best, it makes an easy vehicle to explain why the main character is a fridge or whatever gimmick they're using to get clicks. 99% of seasonal isekai could have just been vanilla fantasy stories and lost nothing. I'll use an isekai I think is actually written decently well as an example. Overlord. One of the underrated highlights of the series is its sense of humor. Because Ainz isn't actually the 5D chess master his subordinates think he is, he has to bullshit his way through most social interactions. This works pretty much every time because everyone assumes he's just too smart for them to comprehend and then interpret it in a way that makes him come off like this brilliant tactician. It's a hilarious dynamic enabled by the fact that Ainzul Gon, aka Satoru Suzuki, is a fish out of water twice over, forced into a role he can't live up to in a world which he doesn't understand. The isekai aspect informs the rest of the narrative, especially in the characterization of the protagonist. One could argue that the story loses a bit of its depth when the isekai aspect is removed. But is it doable without it? Absolutely. Honestly, the isekai bit convolutes things way more than they need to be. Like, the whole finding other players' motivation might as well not exist for all its matter to the plot. And they're not even in the same world as the game, so what was the point of having them be from a video game at all? Maybe I'd let it slide if the game was cool, but everything I've seen about Yggdrasil tells me it's unbalanced, pay-to-win dog shit. Like, don't even get me started on the anti-espionage spells. You're telling me players were actually expected to devote character resources to keep from being overheard? Just don't let anyone else in the Discord call, dumbass! But I digress. Point is, even though the author does their best to make the most of the isekai concept, nothing about Ainz or his entourage being from a different reality ultimately matters to the story being told. Sure, this might be a semantic argument. After all, is anything really necessary in a story? As the late great Patches O'Houlihan once said,
Necessary? Is it necessary for me to drink my own urine? Probably not. No. But I do it anyway because it's sterile and I like the taste.
I'm just saying, were Ainz rewritten to be, say, a merchant turned into a lich by a group of monsters attempting to revive their master who now has to pretend to be said master so his new minions don't re-murder him? Wouldn't that be a much more interesting story than Ice Crown Citadel, but it's in the Sword Coast and also I'm the Lich King? What I'm trying to say is, if being an isekai doesn't add to your story in some meaningful way beyond narrative convenience, why bother having it at all? Hell, even the authors are starting to figure this out, which is why all these I can't believe it's not isekai anime have started popping up in its place. That should be the final nail in the coffin right there. The fact that you can have all the same power fantasy and wish fulfillment as an isekai without the actual isekai just proves how useless the trope actually is. Now, if they could just insert that wish fulfillment into a unique story instead of continuously shuffling the words hero, demon king, and cheat skill around on a Mad Lib, but baby steps. Let's start by teaching them that slavery is bad and basically everything about consent, and go from there.